If I say the Sikkim on Brachas, by Haeitz, by Adama, unlike the cranberries, the whole shear and the Sikkim is Mosik Midvash, doesn't need any sugar added, and shows which bracha to make, Brichas HaTorah, or Sharionu, Sikkim.
Just what we learned today, Bez Hashem, first like we just heard, we have a beautiful Torah, we have to live al-pi Torah, and this year is a good mashal that we have to define things al-pi Torah. The difference in an Haeitz and Adam is not a tree versus a bush or fruit versus a vegetable. Basically, the way the Gemara says, that's what we paskin, it has to have not only a perennial fruit that the root survives the winter, but the trunk, the gavza, the tree itself has to survive the winter. That's one of the main characteristics of a bar pri Haeitz versus a bar pri Adama. A banana, which is a huge tree, is considered a bar pri Adama because the tree does not survive the winter. There are other factors to consider. If it gives you a fruit the first year, that's an indication it's not a fruit. If the quality is peiches v'hoilach, deteriorates, it's not a fruit. If there's no branches, as a typical tree is, that's already somewhat of an indication that it's not a fruit. And a hollow trunk is also an indication that it's not the typical fruit. When a person has a suffix, Haeitz or Adama, you make a bar pri Hadama, but that's not an excuse to live in ignorance. You have to learn halachis, like the Mishnah Berurah says, and determine Haeitz or Adama. But we did come out today that an avocado, a persimmon, starfruit, quince, kumquat are definite bar pri Haeitz and fully applicable hilchis arla. An artichoke is a vegetable, and it's also a real halachic vegetable. It's not a perennial. The roots survive, but not the bush itself. Melons are bar pri Adama, watermelon, cantaloupe, and honeydew, etc. Even though they are fruits, but it's not a pri Haeitz. All nuts are Haeitz, except, as we said, peanuts and perhaps donuts. But certainly the peanuts are not a nut. They are basically a legume, a kitnius. A sabra is a prickly pear. There is a bar pri Haeitz. Coconut chips is bar pri Haeitz if it's edible. Banana is Adama. We saw a nidan is an Adama misafik, or some say it's a vadai. But the fact that there's no orla would indicate that it's Adama mitayras vadai. Some avoid making a bracha on Adama directly, tavalayim bracha, but that we could see that there is a bar pri Adama. A pineapple is an Adama because it doesn't have any of the characteristics of a real tree, especially it's a bush, and the bush dies. Papaya is pretty suffix-dick, and the person should avoid making a bracha directly on that. A halacha, it's Adama if you have nothing else to make a bracha on. Eggplants is Vadi Adama, hot peppers are Adama. Mulberries and blueberries are Vadei bar pri Haeitz with all hilchas arla. Blackberries and raspberries we saw as a big suffix. The minig is to make Hadama when they're cleaned properly, of course. Strawberries is a Vadei Hadama. Craisins is a huge suffix, and the Vadi should avoid making a bracha directly on the craisins. Sesame seeds, when edible, is a bar pri Adama. Pomegranate, kiwi is a bar pri Haeitz, certainly. Hot palms, the minig is to make Hadama today because it's grown just for the hot, but it's not a pri Haeitz, it's the Haeitz itself. Sugar and cinnamon, when edible, of course, is a shahakol. Genetically engineered tomato would be a bar pri Haeitz. Mushrooms are always a shahakol, and tamarillo, which is a sort of a tomato grown on a tree, is definitely a bar pri Haeitz because that's taka bar pri Haeitz.